I'm Margaret, and welcome to Knit Pickers PEI in beautiful downtown Mayfield. A small community, not even a town, not a village, a small community a few kilometers south of Cavendish Beach. Today, I'm going to talk about 3 different ways to cast off your knitting projects. Now, lots of people have different ways of casting on when you're starting. A cast-on edge that might give you a stretchier edge, or a cast-on edge that might give you a firmer edge. Well, it's the same thing with a cast-off. So, shall we get started? So as you can see, I've prepared 3 different swatches for our cast-offs. Each swatch is knit in an Aran weight wool on a 5mm needle, and I've cast on a total of 15 stitches for each swatch. So the first cast-off method I'm going to use is the very traditional cast-off method, the one I think that probably most people are very familiar with. Now, all of these swatches were knit in stockinette, knit a row, and purl a row. However, if you are using a rib stitch or any other pattern in your knitting, if it's knit 2 and purl 2, follow the pattern in your knitting. So in this case, I'm going to be knitting all the way across. But if I had knit 2, purl 2, I would knit 2 stitches, and then I would purl the next stitch and purl the next stitch and knit the next stitch and knit the next stitch. So just follow along in whatever pattern you're using to cast off. So for this one, the very traditional cast off, I'm just going to knit the first 2 stitches, and then I'm going to insert my needle from left to right into the first stitch on the needle and bring that up and over. And then I knit the next stitch. Oops. Insert my left hand needle from left to right into the first stitch on the right hand needle, and up and over she goes. And I just continue on with that until I reach the end of my swatch. Now, as I was saying, if this next stitch was a purl stitch, I would bring my yarn forward, I would purl that stitch, and then I would bring this first stitch up and over. So you just simply follow the pattern in your knitting that you're casting off. So I'm going to carry on doing this until I reach the end. I will speed this up because there's not any point in watching this same motion for 15 stitches over and over and over again. And here I am at my final 2 stitches. I knit that last stitch, insert my left hand needle from left to right into the first stitch, up and over she goes, and then I take the tail of my yarn and I just slide that through the loop and snug it up. And there is my cast off row. It's got a reasonable amount of stretch. This is what I will call a very balanced cast off edge. It's not too firm and it's not too soft. So it's a very useful all-round cast off edge. So now on to swatch number 2. And after we've knit all 3 swatches off, we'll compare their stretch factor. So here we are on swatch number 2. Again, the same Aran weight of yarn, same 15 stitches on a 5mm needle. Now for this one, it's a series of knit 2s together. So I go into the first 2 stitches and I knit those 2 together. Then I take that stitch that's on my right hand needle, transfer it back onto my left hand needle, and knit those 2 together. Take that stitch, transfer it back onto my left hand needle, and knit these 2 together. And it is just a straight transfer. I'm not going into it as a twisted stitch. I'm just, if I were to take the 2 needles side by side, just a straight transfer over so that I'm not twisting the stitch at all. Knit those 2 together. Transfer it back onto my left hand needle once again and knit those 2 together. Whoops, split my yarn there. There we go. And so I'll carry on with that through to the end. Now I have touched on following the pattern of your knitting, and in the samples I was working with stockinette, so I was knitting all the way across. But let's just pretend that I had done a 2x2 rib on these swatches. So this is my knit 2 together swatch. So I've just finished my second knit stitch, and we'll pretend that these 2 stitches are both purl stitches, and then the row ends with 2 knit stitches. So purl, purl, knit, knit. So what I'm going to do, this, as I said, is my knit 2 together. So I take the stitch that's on my left hand needle, transfer it back to my right, but instead of knitting these 2 stitches together, I'm going to bring my yarn forward and I'm going to purl those 2 stitches together. And then my next stitch we'll pretend is also a purl stitch. So transfer that back onto my left hand needle, purl these 2 stitches together, I'm going to bring my yarn to the back because these next 2 stitches are knit stitches. So transfer back over and knit 2 together, transfer back over and knit 2 together. And then just simply pull the tail of the yarn through. So that would be how you follow your pattern when you're doing your knit 2 together bind off. And there is our cast off edge. Now this particular cast off edge feels a lot firmer. The difference in the width doesn't appear very dramatic, but this one, the first cast off edge, just feels to have a little more stretch. So if you're looking for a slightly firmer cast off edge, the knit 2 together cast off edge might be what you need to go with. And for our final cast off edge, we will do our super stretchy cast off edge. Now this particular edge is the edge that I use when I'm knitting toe up socks, as in my super simple sock pattern. And this particular one, when you're knitting toe up socks and you're finishing with the cuff of your sock, you don't want that cuff to bind on your leg. You don't want it to be tight on your leg, especially if you're knitting a pair of socks for diabetics. So this particular cast off edge is very stretchy, and you'll actually see it gives a bit of a flare out. So you start by knitting your first 2 stitches, and then you can transfer them back onto your left-hand needle, and you're going to knit through the back of those 2. So taking my right-hand needle, inserting it into the back of those 2 stitches, and knitting, inserting it through the back and knitting through those 2 stitches. Now, just as I mentioned with the other pattern, if this next stitch were a purl stitch, I would purl this one. But because this is in stockinette, I'm just going to be knitting all the way across. So again, I knit this particular stitch, transfer the 2 stitches back onto my left-hand needle, and then I knit through the back of those 2. Now, if you're comfortable, there is a little shortcut you can take here. So again, knit that first stitch. When you've got both of your stitches on your right-hand needle, you can take your left-hand needle and insert it through the front, which puts your right-hand needle into the position to knit through the back of those stitches. So I'll do that one more time. I knit this stitch. Now with both of my knit stitches on my right-hand needle, I take my left-hand needle and insert it through the front of the stitches, which will leave my right-hand needle in the back, which is where I want it to knit through the back of these stitches. Knit. And if you're not comfortable or if you find that difficult, just simply transfer those 2 stitches back onto your left-hand needle and insert your right-hand needle through the back and knit through the back. And so then I'm just going to carry on knitting through till the last 2 stitches. Now let's take a look at following the pattern on our super stretchy bind off. So once again, we'll imagine that this sample swatch was knit in a knit 2, purl 2 pattern. So these 2 stitches were knit stitches, these 2 stitches we'll imagine are purl stitches, and the final 2 stitches are knit stitches. So I've finished this sequence. I'm going to knit through the back of those 2 stitches. But now we're going to pretend that this is a purl stitch. So I bring my yarn forward, I purl that first stitch, and then I either transfer both of those stitches back onto my left-hand needle and purl through the front, and I'll show you the second technique. As this second stitch we're also pretending is a purl stitch, I purl this stitch, and if you're comfortable, rather than transferring those 2 stitches onto my left-hand needle, I'm going to insert my left-hand needle into the back of those 2 stitches, which puts my right hand needle in purl position in the front of those 2 stitches, and I purl those 2 stitches together. And then we would come to our final 2 stitches, which are knit stitches. Bring our yarn to the back, knit, and knit those 2 stitches together, and knit, and in this case I'm transferring the 2 stitches to my left hand needle, and I'm going to knit through the back. So on the super stretchy cast off, when you're doing a knit stitch and you're going to knit 2 together, you knit through the back. When you're doing a purl stitch and you're going to purl 2 together, you would just purl 2 together as you normally would. There's no difference. And that is the edge for the stretchy cast off. Now, let's take a look at our other 2 samples. So this is our standard cast off with our super stretchy. Now automatically you can see on only 15 stitches the super stretchy cast off is wider, and it has a lot of give to it. So it is an ideal stretchy cast off for something like the top of socks where you don't want them to bind. And your standard cast off versus your knit 2 together cast off. Those 2 look to be about the same width, but the standard cast off has a little more stretch than the knit 2 together cast off. And they actually look quite different as well. I'm not sure if you can really see the difference on film, but it does look quite different, where your standard cast off and your super stretchy cast off have a very similar appearance, but the super stretchy cast off, those stitches are a little bit larger, even though I used the same size needles. So I'm sure that you'll find some useful applications for these 3 different forms of cast off methods. And in the meantime, happy knitting!